Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute since my last video. Thanks for bearing with me. It was just one of those moments where life got a bit much. Work got a bit hectic. I took one big trip that I've been planning on for 2 years, which is actually where most of the new additions to my background come from. Background explanation video is also coming soon. And then, funnily enough, my mental health took a dip because I had a bit too much on my plate. So here's your gentle reminder to take care of yourself. I've been taking some time to recuperate. And while I've been doing that, I also realized that the format I had been planning for this series just wasn't going to work out. Originally, I had planned to do just one big video for each scene that I was going to cover in the play Romeo and Juliet, but that was just not going to do it. I did actually do the first video analysis, the first scene of the play, and in the editing process, I had done the script, I had done the filming, I was in the editing process, and I actually did manage to get a complete Act 1, Scene 1 analysis video, but I just wasn't happy with it. And I couldn't, in good conscience, post it and pretend that I was fine with it, because I was not. I had to cut, I think, about 20 minutes of material out of the finished video. And those were things that I felt were really important to understand the scene and the importance of the scene and why the scene is there to begin with. And yeah, so I couldn't in good conscience leave all of that out and still claim that I did a thorough analysis of the first scene. And I didn't originally know what to do. I have now come to the conclusion that I'm just going to do multiple videos on each scene, which, now that I've arrived at this conclusion, it seems kind of obvious. Like, oh, you can't fit everything in one video, just make multiple. But I went through like several iterations of like what I was going to do, with like, oh, I'm just gonna use the cut material for my Patreon exclusive stuff, or I'm just gonna write the scripts differently. And well, I was kind of like always stuck on this point that if I'm doing this, then the work I've done for the first video already is kind of just going to be in vain. Well, it sort of is and it isn't. I have rewritten all of my scripts. I have rewritten the entirety of the Act 1, Scene 1 analysis. I've split it into 3 parts. This is part 1 now. I did use large chunks of the original script, but I did entirely rewrite them. So yeah, that also took like a minute and a half. But yeah, I'm back now, and I'm ready to get started. So let's get this party rolling, shall we? All right, let's start with a little bit of a recap, because like I said, the last video has been a minute. So in that last video, I've talked a little bit about Shakespeare, who he was, what he was up to, and what time period he lived in. Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and actor who lived most of his life in the Elizabethan era, so under Queen Elizabeth I. During the end of Shakespeare's life, King James I was on the throne. The Elizabethan era was also known as England's Golden Age, because it was marked by stability, peace, and prosperity, which allowed things like art and the theatre to flourish, giving rise to artists and playwrights such as William Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote at least 37 plays and 154 sonnets. By the way, if you want me to talk about one of those in the future, let me know in the comments down below. But in this video series, we are talking about one of Shakespeare's most famous plays, Romeo and Juliet. Now, I don't remember if I've mentioned this in my last video. Actually, I have rewatched my first video, and I am 100% certain that I did not mention this. But Romeo and Juliet is not a love story. I have actually claimed in my last video that it is, but I want to correct that now, because at its core, Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. Yes, the characters, Romeo and Juliet, fall in love, Although you could actually make the argument that it may not even be love, but infatuation. But I'll come back to it when I talk about Romeo and Juliet's first meeting in one of the future videos. However, the play itself is not a romance story. It is written as a tragedy. Fundamentally, this is a story about how love and hate can make you do stupid and irrational things, and about the deathly consequences this can have. Although, technically, you could argue that up until Tybalt's death, the play functions almost like a comedy. But I think in my last video, I've already talked about how one of the starkest differences between a tragedy and a comedy is the ending. In a comedy, everybody gets to live happily ever after. In a tragedy, everybody, or nearly everybody, dies by the end. Also, in my last video, I've talked a fair bit about the prologue and why it's important. Namely, because it tells us, the audience, from the very beginning, what's going to happen, and that Romeo and Juliet's romance is pretty much doomed from the start. This, on the one hand, introduces the idea of fate and how it's working against our two protagonists. On the other hand, it creates a sense of dramatic irony. The audience knows something that the characters don't. And with all of that context out of the way, let's finally set foot into the streets of Verona and see how Shakespeare begins his tale. The scene opens with two Capulet servants, Samson and Gregory, walking through the streets of Verona and joking about the long-standing feud between their masters and the Montagues. Samson in particular is very loud and aggressive and full of bluster, making all kinds of crude remarks about what he will do if he runs into a Montague. When two Montague servants, Abram and Balthazar, appear, Samson tries to provoke them by biting his thumb, a rude and highly insulting gesture in Shakespeare's time, kind of comparable to a middle finger nowadays. They exchange words, and soon enough, swords are drawn, because apparently that's just how things are done in Verona. Benvolio, Romeo's cousin, enters and urges everyone to stay peaceful. But then Tybalt, Juliet's hot-headed cousin, arrives and escalates everything by attacking Benvolio. The fight spreads, drawing in the citizens of Verona, and eventually Lord Capulet and Lord Montague join too. Enter the prince, who's absolutely had it. He stops the fight, threatens death as punishment for any future disturbances, and reminds everyone that this is not the first time he's had to break up their nonsense. The crowd disperses, leaving only Lord and Lady Montague with Benvolio on the stage. Here, the scene shifts to a more private tone. Lord and Lady Montague speak with Benvolio, first about the brawl, and then about their son, Romeo, who has been acting strangely as of late. Wandering alone at dawn, avoiding company, and shutting himself in his room during the day. When Romeo finally appears, his parents withdraw, leaving him to speak alone with Benvolio. Romeo then reveals the reason for his mood. He is lovesick. He laments quite dramatically about the pains of love, though he never mentions the name of the woman he's in love with, which can lead first-time audiences to assume he's already talking about Juliet, and the reason he wouldn't mention her name is because she's a Capulet. In reality, he's pining after a girl named Rosaline, who never appears on stage, by the way. So in less than 250 lines, Shakespeare introduces us to everything we need to know. The city of Verona, a place ruled by violence and pride, the Capulets and the Montagues, two families locked in hatred, the prince, who rules Verona and who's running out of patience, and Romeo, a young man already lost in the idea of love before he's even met Juliet. And with all of that established, let's take a closer look at how Shakespeare introduces this world, starting with a feud that fuels the entire tragedy. So right when they first appear on stage, Gregory and Samson talk about how they will not carry coals. That's line 1, meaning they won't put up with insults, and how they'll fight anyone who crosses them. Then, in line 6, Samson says, "A dog of the house of Montague moves me." The word move here means to anger, so Samson is basically saying, "These Montagues really make me angry," but with the added sting of calling them dogs. This immediately establishes the feud, but it also shows how deeply rooted it is. Samson and Gregory are servants, yet they are completely invested in their master's hatred. Gregory even says, "The quarrel is between our masters and us, their men." So the feud isn't just between the heads of the two households. It goes all the way down the social ladder to their servants. Cook aside, it's never explicitly mentioned in the text that Samson and Gregory are servants, but Shakespeare signals it through their language. They speak in prose, casual, everyday speak, whereas the higher status characters speak in verse, often using iambic pentameter. Even the rhythm of the language reinforces the social hierarchy. Also, unless you read the stage directions, which say enter Samson and Gregory of the House of Capulet, and as an audience, you wouldn't get any of those, you wouldn't know which house Samson and Gregory belong to. Well, until they mention that they want to fight the Montagues. But this is something that would have to be communicated to the audience visually. I don't know if anyone remembers the 2011 movie Romeo and Juliet, which is loosely based on this Shakespeare play. But in that one, the Capulet gnomes were red and the Montague gnomes were blue. This is something that could be done in a stage production too. Now, back to the dialogue. This section is overflowing with puns. Practically every line is wordplay. Just listen to this exchange in lines 3 to 6. Samson says, "I mean, and we be in collar, will draw." Then Gregory goes, "I, while you live, draw your neck out of a collar." Samson, "I strike quickly, being moved." And then Gregory goes, "But thou art not quickly moved to strike." There's a lot of wordplay going on in just these 4 lines. Firstly, we have the similarity of sound between choler, which means anger, and collar, which is a hangman's noose, but could also refer to the collar of a shirt. Then we have the double meaning of draw. Samson uses it in the sense of drawing your sword, saying something that basically boils down to, if we get angry, we'll draw our swords. However, Gregory immediately twists those words by using draw in the more general sense of pulling something out or away, like your neck out of a hangman's noose. So he's basically saying something along the lines of, by all means, get angry if you want. Just make sure you don't end up drawing your neck out of a noose. He's basically advising Samson to be careful. Now let's break down that second exchange, which is another pun battle. This time, strike has a double meaning. It can mean hitting something in general, but here it specifically refers to attacking someone in a fight. Being moved, I already talked about, which means getting angry or being provoked. So again, Samson is saying, I attack or strike when someone angers me. And Gregory immediately counters with, yeah, but you're too slow to actually fight. In other words, you talk big, but act slow. It's a straight up insult. Their entire conversation goes like this. One of them says something, the other plays on their words. It's funny, almost playful, and that's not accidental. This opening does 2 things. It lightens the mood before the actual brawl, and it underscores the ridiculousness and absurdity of the feud. These men are deeply entrenched in the violence of their master's rivalry, but they're also joking about it, suggesting that they don't take it entirely seriously. And speaking of absurd escalation, let's talk about the thumb biting. Like I said, in Shakespeare's time, biting a thumb was sort of the Elizabethan middle finger. Rude? Yes. Worth a sword fight? Probably not. And yet, this is what it leads to. But I also want to highlight the exchange that follows. So, after Samson bites his thumb at Abram and Balthazar, Abram, in line 39, goes, "Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?" To which Samson replies, "I do bite my thumb, sir." He's admitting to being rude, just not specifically at them. Then Abram repeats his question, "Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?" He's asking for confirmation. Are you being rude to us? To me, this reads as though he wants to make doubly sure that Samson and Gregory are the aggressors before he escalates the situation further. But of course, Samson doesn't want to get his master into trouble. So after checking with Gregory if they'd still be in the right if he said yes, he settles on, "No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I do bite my thumb." Here's the reason this stood out to me. It reads as incredibly childish, like a playground argument almost, like did not, did too, did not, did too. These are grown men armed with swords, and yet they sound like bickering schoolchildren. Shakespeare uses comedy here to highlight how absurdly petty and irrational this feud is. Oh, and if you thought that the servants getting involved in their master's grievances was already ridiculous, just wait until you hear that the citizens of Verona also waste no time and opportunity to jump into the fray. After Benvolio and Tybalt come on stage and argue for a bit, which we will talk about in detail in the next video, they start fighting with each other, and soon after, 3 or 4 citizens join the fight as well. One of them even shouts, "Beat them down! Down with the Capulets! Down with the Montagues!" This shows 2 things. That the citizens of Verona do not have a side. They don't favor either the Capulets or the Montagues. They just jump into the chaos and hit whoever's in front of them. And 2, how baked into the city's identity this feud is. Verona is not a peaceful place, but always on the brink of violence. From servants to ordinary citizens, everybody's always ready to get into a fight. Now, you might be wondering, and rightly so, why on earth the play starts this way. Why would Shakespeare choose to open a play called Romeo and Juliet without either of the titular characters? Well, in part this goes back to what I said in the beginning. Romeo and Juliet is not a love story. It's a tragedy. And this feud is the reason why. If the characters weren't so entrenched in it, which Shakespeare shows us with this opening scene that they are, then Romeo and Juliet's love might actually stand a chance. But it doesn't. And we already know that, thanks to the prologue, which I talked about extensively in my last video, which also makes the scene a bit of foreshadowing. It shows that fate is already working against our main characters. And that's before we, the audience, have even met them. A little bit later on, the prince declares that if either family incites violence again, they'll pay for it with their lives. And we already know that someone is going to die. So right from the start, it's made pretty clear that this story isn't going to have a happy ending. And with this opening, with how volatile this feud is and how deeply ingrained it is into the city of Verona, Shakespeare shows us from the very beginning that the tragic outcome is inevitable. It's the kind of tragedy that was never going to happen any other way. And that is where Shakespeare opens the play with a full-on brawl in the streets. All right, we're nearly at the end, guys. Just summing up the most important points. Romeo and Juliet, one of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies, opens not with the titular lovers, but with 2 Capulet servants, Samson and Gregory, who joke, pun, and bicker their way straight into a fight with 2 Montague servants, Abram and Balthazar. The constant wordplay makes the feud seem funny at first, but also highlights its absurdity and how deeply it's woven into Verona's society. Even the lowest ranking characters are ready to brawl over their master's pride. Also, I'd like to point out that Shakespeare explicitly wrote with an audience made up of different social classes in mind. If you remember, in my last video, I talked about the setup of the Globe Theatre, where rich nobles would sit in the covered galleries and the lower classes stood in the open-air pit. This means that some lines were aimed at the galleries, think monologues, for example, while others were directed to the people in the pit. In this case, I think we can safely assume that the servants' banter was meant mostly for the commoners in the pit, who'd probably recognize themselves in these characters and would be able to laugh both with and at them. The social commentary, though, that's something only a more literary savvy audience might pick up on, in my opinion. And that's not me throwing shade at anyone who didn't catch it right away. Shakespeare deliberately buried it under several layers of humor, so it does require a bit more of a deeper understanding. A rude gesture spirals into a full-blown fight in the streets, drawing in servants, nobles, and ordinary citizens alike. This goes to show how destructive the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues has already become, and sets the audience up for the tragic outcome by reminding us that Romeo and Juliet's love never really stood a chance. And that's it for today's video. In the next one, I'll be looking at two clashing personalities, Benvolio and Tybalt, and what their approaches to the conflict might tell us about how the play views masculinity. Also under the microscope, the prince and how he tries and possibly fails to tame Verona's violence, and how his royal decree might inadvertently help to set up the tragedy. That sounds like something you're interested in? Make sure to join me next time. Let's try this again. And eventually Lord Capulet and Mort. And speaking of absurd escalation, what is that word? To which Samson replies, I do bite my some. During the end of Shakespeare's life, King James I was on the throne. That is one whole sentence. And my teleprompter app is not working again. Yippee! Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.